Hey guys, gonna try this some more. I have chapter 6 for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. We're gonna try and do chapters 6 through 10 today, and keep us going. And I even have the next book lined up. Next book will be James and the Giant Peach, another favorite for first grade. So let's get started. Chapter 6, The First Two Finders. The very next day, the first golden ticket was found. The finder was a boy called Augustus Gloop, and Mr. Bucket's evening newspaper carried a large picture of him on the front page. The picture showed a 9-year-old boy who was so enormously fat he looked as though he had been blown up with a powerful pump. Great flabby folds of fat bulged out of every part of his body, and his face was like a monstrous ball of dough, with two small, greedy, curranty eyes peering out upon the world. The town in which Augustus Gloop lived, the newspapers said, had gone wild with excitement over their hero. Flags were flying from all the windows, children had been given a holiday from school, and a parade was being organized in honor of the famous youth. I just knew Augustus would find the golden ticket, his mother had told the newspaper men. He eats so many candy bars a day that it was almost impossible for him to not find one. Eating is his hobby, you know. That's all he is interested in. But still, that's better than being a hooligan and shouting off zip guns and things like that in his spare time, isn't it? And what I always say is, he wouldn't go on eating like he does unless he needed nourishment, wouldn't he? It's all vitamins anyway. What a thrill it will be for him to visit Mr. Wonka's marvelous factory. We're just as proud as can be. There they are. What a revolting woman, said Grandma Josephine, and what a repulsive boy, said Grandma Georgina. Only 4 golden tickets left, said Grandpa George. I wonder who will get those. And now the whole country, indeed the whole world, seems suddenly to be caught up in a mad candy-buying spree. Everybody's searching frantically for those precious remaining tickets. Fully grown women were seen going into sweet shops and buying 10 Wonka candy bars at a time, then tearing off the wrappers on the spot and peering eagerly underneath for a glint of golden wrapper. Children were taking hammers and smashing through their piggy banks and running out to the shops with handfuls of money. In one city, a famous gangster robbed a bank of $5,000 and spent the whole lot on candy bars that same afternoon. And when the police entered his house to arrest him, they found him sitting on the floor amidst mountains of candy, ripping off the wrappers with his blade of a long dagger. In far-off Russia, a woman called Charlotte Russe claimed to have found the second ticket, but it turned out to be a clever fake. In England, the famous scientist, Professor Foulbody, invented a machine which would tell you at once, without opening the wrapper of a candy bar, whether or not there was a golden ticket hidden underneath it. The machine had a mechanical arm that shot out with tremendous force and grabbed hold of anything that had the slightest bit of gold inside it. For a moment, it looked like the answer to everything. But, unfortunately, while Professor was showing off the machine to the public at the candy counter of a large department store, the mechanical arm shot out, made a grab for the gold filling in the back tooth of a duchess who was standing nearby. There was an ugly scene, and the machine was smashed by the crowd. Suddenly, on the day before Charlie Bucket's birthday, the newspaper announced the second golden ticket. It had been found. The lucky person was a small girl called Veruca Salt, who lived with her rich parents in a great city far away. Once again, Mr. Bucket's evening paper carried a big picture of the finder. She was sitting between her beaming father and mother in the living room of their house, waving the golden ticket above her head and grinning from ear to ear. Veruca's father, Mr. Salt, had eagerly explained to the newspaper men exactly how the ticket was found. You see, Fowlers, he said, as soon as my little girl told me that she simply had to have one of those golden tickets, I went into the town and started buying up all the Wonka candy bars I could lay my hands on. Thousands of them. I must have bought hundreds of thousands. Then I had them loaded onto trucks and sent directly to my own factory. I'm in the peanut business, you see. I've got about 100 women working for me over at my joint, shelling peanuts and roasting and salting. That's what they do all day long, these women. They sit there shelling peanuts. So I says to them, okay, girls, I says, from now on you can stop shelling peanuts and start shelling the wrappers off these crazy candy bars instead. And they did. I had every worker in the place yanking off the paper of those bars until chocolate full speed ahead fell from morning till night. But 3 days went by and we had no luck. Oh, it was terrible. My little Veruca got more and more upset each day. And every time I went home, she would scream at me, "Where's my golden ticket? I want my golden ticket." And she would lie for hours on the floor, kicking and yelling in the most disturbing way. Well, sir, I just hated to see my little girl feeling unhappy like that, so I vowed I would keep up the search until I'd got her what she wanted. Then suddenly, on the evening of the 4th day, one of my women workers yelled, "I've got it, a golden ticket." And I said, "Give it to me, quick." And she did, and I rushed at home and gave it to my darling Veruca. And now she's all smiles, and we have a happy home once again. "That's even worse than the fat boy," said Grandma Josephine. "She needs a real good spanking," said Grandma Georgina. "I don't think the girl's father played it quite fair, Grandpa, do you?" Charlie murmured. "He spoils her," said Grandpa Joe, "and no good can ever come from spoiling a child like that, Charlie. You mark my words." "Come to bed, my darling," said Charlie's mother. "Tomorrow's your birthday, don't forget that, so I expect you will be up early to open your present." "A Wonka candy bar," cried Charlie. "It's a Wonka candy bar, isn't it?" "Yes, my love," his mother said. "Of course it is." "Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if I found the 3rd golden ticket inside it?" Charlie said. "Bring it in here when you get it," Grandpa Joe said. "We can all watch you taking off the wrapper." Chapter 7. Charlie's Birthday. "Happy birthday!" cried the 4 old grandparents as Charlie came into their room early the next morning. Charlie smiled nervously and sat down on the edge of the bed. He was holding his present, his only present, very carefully in his 2 hands. "Wonka's Whipple Scrumptious Fudge Mellow Delight," it said on the wrapper. The 4 old people, 2 at either end of the bed, propped themselves up on their pillows and stared with anxious eyes at the candy bar in Charlie's hands. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket came in and stood at the foot of the bed watching Charlie. The room became silent. Everybody was watching Charlie now. Looking down at the candy bar, he ran his fingers slowly back and forth along the length of it, stroking it lovingly, and the shiny paper made little sharp crackly noises in the quiet room. Then Mrs. Bucket said gently, "You mustn't be too disappointed, my darling, if you don't find what you're looking for underneath that wrapper. You really can't expect to be so lucky as all that." "She's quite right," Mr. Bucket said. Charlie didn't say anything. "After all," Grandma Josephine said, "in the whole wide world there are only 3 tickets to be found." "The thing to remember, Grandma Georgina," it said, "is that whatever happens, you'll still have the bar of candy." "Wonka's Whipple Scrumptious Fudge Mellow Delight," cried Grandpa George. "It's the best of 'em all. You'll just love it." "Yes," said Charlie, "I know." "Just forget about all those golden tickets and enjoy the candy," Grandpa Joe said. "Why don't you do that?" They all knew it was ridiculous to expect this one poor little candy bar to have a magic ticket inside it, and they were trying gently and as kindly as they could to prepare Charlie for the disappointment. But there was one other thing that the grown-ups also knew, and it was this. However small the chance might be of striking lucky, the chance was there. The chance had to be there. This particular candy bar has as much chance as any other of having a golden ticket. And that was why all the grandparents and parents in the room were actually just as tense and excited as Charlie was, although they were pretending to be very calm. "You better go ahead and open it up, or you'll be late for school," Grandpa Joe said. "You might as well get it over with," Grandpa George said. "Open it, my dear," Grandma Georgina said. "Please open it. You're making me jumpy." Very slowly, Charlie's fingers began to tear open the small corner of the wrapping paper. The old people on the bed all leaned forward, craning their saggy necks. Then suddenly, as though he couldn't bear the suspense any longer, Charlie tore the wrapper right down the middle, and onto his lap there fell a light brown creamy-colored chocolate candy bar. There was no sign of a golden ticket anywhere. "Well, that's that," said Grandpa Joe brightly. "It's just what we expected." Charlie looked up. 4 kind old faces were watching him intently from the bed. He smiled at them, a small, sad smile. And then he shrugged his shoulders and picked up the candy bar and held it out to his mother and said, "Here, Mother, have a bit. We'll share it. I want everybody to taste it." "Certainly not," Mother said. And all the others cried, "Oh, no, no, we wouldn't dream of it. It's all yours." "Please," begged Charlie, turning around and offering it to Grandpa Joe. But neither he nor anyone else would take even a tiny bite. "It's time to go to school, my darling," Mrs. Bucket said, putting an arm around Charlie's skinny shoulders. "Come on, or you'll be late." 2 more golden tickets found. Chapter 8. That evening, Mr. Bucket's newspaper announced the finding of not only the 3rd golden ticket, but the 4th one as well. "2 golden tickets found today," screamed the headlines. "Only 1 more left." "All right," said Grandpa Joe, when the whole family was gathered in the old people's room after supper. "Let's hear who found them." "The 3rd ticket," read Mr. Bucket, holding the newspaper up to his face because his eyes were bad and he couldn't afford glasses. "The 3rd ticket was found by a Miss Violet Beauregard." There was great excitement in the Beauregard household when our reporter arrived to interview the lucky young lady. Cameras were clicking and flashbulbs were flashing, and people were pushing and jostling and trying to get a bit closer to the famous girl. And the famous girl was standing on a chair in a living room, waving the golden ticket madly at arm's length, as though she were flagging a taxi. She was talking very fast and very loudly to everyone, but it was not easy to hear all that she said because she was chewing so ferociously on a piece of gum at the same time. "I'm a gum chewer normally," she shouted, "but when I heard about these ticket things of Mr. Wonka's, I laid off the gum and switched to candy bars in the hope of striking lucky. Now, of course, I'm right back on gum. I just adore gum. I can't do without it. I munch it all day long, except for a few minutes at meal times when I take it out and stick it behind my ear for safekeeping. To tell you the honest truth, I simply wouldn't feel comfortable if I didn't have that little wedge of gum to chew on every moment of the day. I really wouldn't. My mother says it's not ladylike, and it looks ugly to see a girl's jaws going up and down like mine do all the time. But I don't agree. And who's she to criticize anyway? Because if you ask me, I'd say that her jaws are going up and down almost as much as mine are, just from yelling at me every minute of the day." "Now, Violet," Mrs. Beauregard said from the far corner of the room, where she was standing on the piano to avoid being trampled by the mob. "All right, Mother, keep your hair on," Miss Beauregard shouted. "And now," she went on, turning to the reporters again, "it may interest you to know that this piece of gum I'm chewing right here at this moment is one I've been working on for over 3 months solid. That's a record, that is. It's beaten the record held by my best friend, Miss Cornelia Princemental. And was she mad? It's my most treasured possession now, this piece of gum. At nights, I just stick it on the end of the bedpost." There's Violet. "At nights, I just stick it on the end of the bedpost, and it's as good as ever in the mornings. A bit hard at first, maybe, but soon softens up again after I've given it a few good chews. Before I started chewing for the world record, I used to change my piece of gum once a day. I used to do it in our elevator on the way home from school. Why the elevator? Because I liked sticking the gooey piece that I had just finished with onto one of the elevator buttons. Then the next person who came along and pressed the button got my old gum at the end of his or her finger. Ha! What a racket they kicked up, some of them. And you get the best results with women who have expensive gloves on. Oh yes, I'm thrilled to be going to Mr. Wonka's factory, and I understand that afterwards he's going to give me enough gum to last me for the rest of my whole life. Whoopee! Hooray! Beastly girl, said Grandma Josephine. Despicable, said Grandma Georgina. She'll come to a sticky end one day chewing all that gum. You see if she doesn't. And who got the fourth golden ticket, Daddy? Charlie asked. Now, let me see, said Mr. Bucket, peering at the newspaper again. Ah, yes, here we are. The fourth golden ticket, he read, was found by a boy called Mike TV. Another bad lot, I'll be bound, muttered Grandma Josephine. Don't interrupt, Grandma, said Mrs. Bucket. The TV household, said Mr. Bucket, going on with his reading, was crammed like all the others with excited visitors when our reporter arrived. But young Mike TV, the lucky winner, seemed extremely annoyed with the whole business. Can't you fools see I'm watching television? He said angrily. I wish you wouldn't interrupt. The 9-year-old boy was seated before an enormous television set with his eyes glued to the screen, and he was watching a film in which one bunch of gangsters was shooting up another bunch of gangsters with machine guns. Mike TV himself had no less than 18 toy pistols of various sizes hanging down from belts around his body. Every now and then he would leap up into the air and fire off half a dozen rounds from one or another of these weapons. Quiet, he shouted when someone tried to ask him a question. Didn't I tell you you are not to interrupt? The show's an absolute whiz-banger. It's terrific. I watch it every day. I watch all of them every day, even the crummy ones, where there's no shooting. I like the gangsters best. Here's Mike TV. They're terrific, these gangsters, especially when they start pumping each other full of lead, or flashing the old stilettos, or giving each other the 1, 2, 3 with their knuckle dusters. Oh boy, wouldn't I give to be doing that myself. It's the life, I tell you. It's terrific. That's quite enough, snapped Grandma Josephine. I can't bear to listen to it. Nor me, said Grandma Georgina. Do all the children behave like this nowadays? Like these brats we've been hearing about? Oh, of course not, said Mr. Bucket, smiling at the old lady in the bed. Some do, of course. In fact, quite a lot of them do, but not all. And now, there's only one ticket left, said Grandpa George. Quite so, sniffed Grandma Georgina. And just as sure as I'll be having cabbage soup for supper tomorrow, that ticket'll go to some nasty little beast who doesn't deserve it. Guess we'll find out. Chapter 9. Grandpa Joe Takes a Gamble. The next day, when Charlie came home from school and went in to see his grandparents, he found that only Grandpa Joe was awake. The other three were all snoring loudly. Shh, whispered Grandpa Joe, and he beckoned Charlie to come closer. Charlie tiptoed over and stood beside the bed. The old man gave Charlie a sly grin, and then he started rummaging under his pillow with one hand. And when the hand came out again, there was an ancient leather purse clutched in the fingers. Under the cover of the bedclothes, the old man opened the purse and tipped it upside down. Out fell a single silver 10-cent piece. It's my secret hoard, he whispered. The others don't know I've got it. And now, you and I are going to have one more fling at finding that last ticket. How about it, eh? But you'll have to help me. Are you sure you want to spend your money on that, Grandpa? Charlie whispered. Of course I'm sure, sputtered the old man excitedly. Don't stand there arguing. I'm just as crazy as you are to find that ticket. Here, Take the money and run down the street to the nearest store and buy the first Wonka candy bar you see and bring it straight back to me, and we'll open it together." Charlie took the little silver coin and slipped quickly out of the room. In 5 minutes, he was back. "Have you got it?" whispered Grandpa Joe, his eyes shining with excitement. Charlie nodded and held out the bar of candy. "Wonka's Nutty Crunch Surprise," it said on the wrapper. "Good," the old man whispered, sitting up on the bed and rubbing his hands. "Now, come over here and sit close to me and we'll open it together. Are you ready?" "Yes," Charlie said, "I'm ready." "All right, you tear off the first bit." "No," Charlie said, "you paid for it. You do it all." The old man's fingers were trembling most terribly as they fumbled with the candy bar. "We don't have a hope, really," he whispered, giggling a bit. "But do you know we have You do know we don't have a hope, don't you?" "Yes," Charlie said, "I know that." They looked at each other, both started giggling nervously. "Mind you," said Grandpa Joe, "there is just that tiny chance that it might be the one. Don't you agree?" "Yes," Charlie said, "of course. Why don't you open it, Grandpa?" "That corner, the one furthest from you. Just tear off a tiny bit, but not quite enough for us to see anything." "Like that?" said the old man. "Yes, now a little bit more." "You finish it," Grandpa Joe said. "I'm too nervous." "No, Grandpa, you must do it yourself." "Very well, then, here goes." He tore off the wrapper. They both stared at what lay underneath. It was a bar of candy, nothing more. All at once they both saw the funny side of the whole thing, and they burst into peals of laughter. "What the heck is going on?" cried Grandma Josephine, waking up suddenly. "Nothing," said Grandpa Joe. "You go on back to sleep." Chapter 10. The family begins to starve. During the next 2 weeks, the weather turned very cold. First came the snow. It began very suddenly one morning, just as Charlie Bucket was getting dressed for school. Standing by the window, he saw huge flakes drifting slowly out of an icy sky that was of the color of steel. By evening, it lay 4 feet deep around the tiny house, and Mr. Bucket had to dig a path from the front door to the road. After the snow, there came a freezing gale that blew for days and days without stopping. And oh, how bitter cold it was! Everything that Charlie touched seemed to be made of ice, and each time he stepped outside the door, the wind was like a knife on his cheek. Inside the house, little jets of freezing air came rushing in through the sides of the windows and under the doors, and there was no place to go to escape them. The 4 old ones lay silent and huddled in their bed, trying to keep the cold out of their bones. The excitement over the golden tickets had long since been forgotten. Nobody in the family gave a thought now to anything except the 2 vital problems of trying to keep warm and trying to get enough to eat. There is something very cold weather gives one an enormous appetite. Most of us find ourselves beginning to crave rich, steaming stews and hot apple pies and all kinds of delicious warming dishes. And because we are all a great deal luckier than we realize, we usually get what we want, or get enough. But Charlie Bucket never got what he wanted because the family couldn't afford it. And as the cold weather went on, he became ravenously and desperately hungry. Both bars of candy, the birthday one and the one Grandpa Joe had bought, had long since been nibbled away, and all he got now were those thin, cabbagey meals 3 times a day. Then, all at once, the meals became even thinner. The reason for this was that the toothpaste factory, the place where Mr. Bucket worked, suddenly went bust and had to close down. Quickly, Mr. Bucket tried to get another job, but he had no luck. In the end, the only way in which he managed to earn a few pennies was by shoveling snow in the streets. But it wasn't enough to buy even a quarter of the food that the 7 people needed. The situation became desperate. Breakfast was a single slice of bread for each person now, and lunch was maybe half a boiled potato. Slowly but surely, everybody in the house began to starve. And every day, little Charlie Bucket, trudging through the snow on his way to school, would have to pass Mr. Willy Wonka's giant chocolate factory. And every day as he came near to it, he would lift his small pointed nose high in the air and sniff the wonderful sweet smell of melting chocolate. Sometimes he would stand motionless outside the gates for several minutes on end, taking deep, swallowing breaths, as though he were trying to eat the smell itself. "That child," said Grandpa Joe, poking his head up from under the blanket one icy morning. "That child has got to have more food. It doesn't matter about us. We're too old to bother with. But a growing boy, he can't go on like this. He's beginning to look like a skeleton." "What can one do?" murmured Grandma Josephine miserably. "He refuses to take any of ours. I hear his mother tried to slip her own piece of bread onto his plate at breakfast this morning, but he wouldn't touch it. He made her take it back." "He's a fine little fellow," said Grandpa George. "He deserves better than this." The cruel weather went on, and every day Charlie Bucket grew thinner and thinner. His face became frighteningly white and pinched. The skin was drawn so tightly over the cheeks that you could see the shapes of his bones underneath. It seemed doubtful whether he could go on much longer like this without becoming dangerously ill. And now, very calmly, with that curious wisdom that seems to come so often to small children in times of hardship, he began to make little changes here and there in some of the things that he did, so as to save his strength. In the mornings he left the house 10 minutes earlier, so that he could walk slowly to school without ever having to run. He sat quietly in the classroom during recess, resting himself while the others rushed outdoors and threw snowballs and wrestled in the snow. Everything he did now was slowly and carefully to prevent exhaustion. Then one afternoon, walking back home with the icy wind in his face, and incidentally feeling hungrier than he had ever felt before, his eye caught suddenly a piece of paper that was lying in the gutter in the snow. The paper was of a greenish color, and there was something vaguely familiar about it. Charlie stepped off the curb and bent down to examine it. Part of it was buried under the snow, but he saw at once what it was. It was a dollar bill. Quickly he looked around him. Had somebody dropped it? No, that was impossible because the way part of it was buried. Several people went hurrying past him on the sidewalk, their chins sunk deep in the collars of their coats, their feet crunching in the snow. Wonder what's going to happen. None of them was searching for any money. None of them was taking the slightest notice of the small boy crouching in the gutter. Then it was his. His dollar? Could he have it? Carefully, Charlie pulled it out from under the snow. It was damp and dirty, but otherwise perfect. A whole dollar. He held it tightly between his shivering fingers, gazing down at it. It meant one thing to him that moment. Excuse me. Only one thing. It meant food. Automatically, Charlie turned and began moving toward the nearest shop. It was only 10 paces away. It was a newspaper and stationery store, the kind that sells almost everything, including candy and cigars. And what he would do, he whispered quickly to himself. He would buy one luscious bar of candy and eat it all up, every bit of it, right then and there. And the rest of the money he would take straight back home and give to his mother. All right, that's up through chapter 10. I'm going to try and do the next 5 here in a little bit and get that going as well. I hope you guys are enjoying the story so far. After we're done reading it, there is a pretty cute little movie that goes with it, with the old Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So we'll try to head in that direction. And then James and the Giant Peach has a cute movie with it too. So let's keep reading, keep checking in. Everybody hang in there. We're making it. We're gonna continue to make it. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and check on Google Classroom. Your parents should have gotten the code to it in their email. And we're doing a first fun little project where you do a handless handshake, and I put an example up there of it. So have fun with that. It's not a grade, it's just for fun. So I will be back later. Have a good night.